the 617 Portside Steering Committee meeting. Reunión de mayo del Comité Directivo de la Comunidad de Portside. Thank you everyone for joining us. Muchas gracias a todos por reunirse con nosotros. Ahorita voy a pasar el micrófono a nuestra intérprete Vicky. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Vicky, our interpreter, who will give instructions on how to access interpretation.
Okay. Bienvenidos sean todos y muchas gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Antes de empezar la reunión, explicaremos las funciones necesarias para acceder a la interpretación simultánea al español. Si están utilizando su computadora portátil o de escritorio, favor de localizar el icono con figura de globo, en la parte inferior de su pantalla cuando este aparezca en un minuto y luego pulsen con interpretación de lenguaje, Language Interpretation, y seleccionen el idioma español. Si están conectándose desde su teléfono, iPad o dispositivo similar, busquen el menú con los 3 puntitos en la esquina superior del lado derecho de su pantalla y pulsen Interpretación de lenguaje o Language Interpretation y luego Español. Esto permite que escuchen la traducción al español con un 80% de volumen y el audio en inglés se escuchará al fondo con un 20% de volumen. Tiene la opción de apagar el audio en inglés pulsando Mute Original Audio, ubicado en el mismo menú donde eligieron el idioma español. Gracias. English participants, if you want to be hearing anything that would be interpreted from Spanish to English, you would also need to choose the English channel. From your computer or desktop or laptop, it's going to be at the bottom, the globe, and then otherwise it will be on your phone or your iPad in the top right corner, the little 3 dots, and you pulse there, and then you'll select language. You can that wouldn't apply. You would turn off English if you didn't want to hear English, but I don't think that applies to you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Vicky. Muchas gracias, Vicky. We're going to give it a couple of seconds for folks to access the interpretation. Vamos a darle unos poquitos segundos para que puedan acceder la interpretación. Thank you very much.
Sí, le escucho bien.
Muchas gracias por la notificación, Alicia. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today for the May Portside Steering Committee meeting. Today we have a big agenda where we'll be going over some important data that partner agencies have been working on to demonstrate the health risks in the Portside community from air pollution. Moving along, I want to hand it over to my colleague Joanny, who will go over the meeting objectives and the agenda.
Hi everyone, today's objectives are to learn about and provide input on the risk modeling and health risk assessment for the Portside community that was co-developed by the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District, CARB, and the Port of San Diego. We'll also be receiving an update on the Portside Air Quality Improvement and Relief Program from the Environmental Health Coalition. So again, packed agenda after a roll call and some general updates, as well as approving last month's meeting notes and tonight's agenda. We'll be receiving the presentation from CARB on the Portside risk modeling and health risk assessment, followed by the update on the Pear program. And we'll close off with public comments and some closing remarks. And then a reminder about our meeting agreements, which are to create space for everyone to contribute, to step up and share your thoughts and ideas, and step back if you've had a chance to contribute, to only have one person speak at a time, to listen to each other and respect each other's opinions, knowledge, and perspective, to be conscious of time, and to speak slowly and clearly for our interpreters. And I'll hand it back to Chewy for roll call.
Thank you, Joanny. And now I'll be going down this list to go over roll call. So to get us started, is Keith Corey from the City of San Diego here?
I am. Hi.
Hi, Keith. Thank you for joining us. And
Sure.
I do want to flag that Shelby is our new alternate for the City of San Diego, who will be joining whenever Keith isn't able to. Jack Munger.
Yes, I am. Good evening.
Thank you, Jack. Is Matthew Hatch here as well?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Massey. Thanks for joining us. Sarah Giobbi.
I'm here. Good evening.
Hi, Sarah. Lydia Pellicer.
I'm here. Thank you.
Hey, Lydia.
Hi.
And then Larry let me know that Commissioner Naranjo isn't able to join, but Larry, you are here.
Hi, yep, here. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Larry. Phil Trom at Sandag.
I'm here. Hi, Julie. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Phil. Moving along, Joy Williams.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Joy. Martin Reeder at National City. Not seeing Martin. Is David Welch here? Not seeing David either. Roman Partida Lopez let us know he isn't able to join us due to a family engagement. Dr. Stephanie Yoon.
Can I talk to you about
I'm here.
I'm on a webinar right now.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Moving along, Diane Vermeulen at Caltrans. Not seeing Diane on the list. Samantha Liu.
Present. Good evening.
Samantha, thanks for joining us. Helen Haas.
Here and able to unmute on time today. Thank you.
Hey. Dinah Villier. She let us know she'll be coming a little late, so I'll be on the lookout when she can join. Next slide. Filomena Marino.
Here. This is Filomena Marino.
Hi, Filomena. Janice Reynoso.
Here, presente.
Hi, Janice.
Hi.
John Alvarado. I see John, so I'll mark you as present. Hillary Medina. Not seeing Hillary. Alicia Sanchez.
Presente.
Margarita Moreno.
Presente.
Hola, Margarita. Naomi Sanchez. Not seeing Naomi. Vanessa Contreras.
Present.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
Salvador Raza Abrica.
Here.
Hi, Sal.
Hi.
Montserrat Hernandez.
Presente.
Hola, Montserrat.
Hola,
Sylvia,
hola.
Sylvia Calzada.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Sylvia. Ashley Valentin. Not seeing Ashley. Josephine Talamantes.
Present.
Hi, Josephine.
Hello.
And Maritza Contreras.
Here.
Hi, Maritza. And that is everyone. Thanks, everyone. And now I wanted to hand it over to Domingo Vigil for any updates. Thank you, Diana. I'll mark you in as present.
All right. Thank you, Chewy. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. I just had a quick announcement. First of all, thank you to all the steering committee members who were able to respond in support of sending a support letter for AB 2141. This piece of legislation is looking to bring additional funding and ongoing funding to the Community Air Protection Program statewide. So it's something that we're really hoping that it's passed by the legislation later this year. It was able to pass the appropriations committee. So, again, thank you everybody for supporting that letter of support. I just wanted to provide that quick update, and we'll continue to update this group as we learn more about the, as the bill moves forward. And that was it from my end. Thank you, Chuy.
Great, thank you so much. And hi, Shelby, I see your message. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Moving along to our next agenda item, I wanted to open it up to the steering committee members for approval of last month's meeting notes and tonight's agenda. Can I get a motion and a second?
I'll motion Josephine Talamantes.
Thank you, Josephine.
I'll second that. This is Sylvia Calzada.
Thank you, Sylvia. Does anyone oppose or would like to abstain from this vote? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, so the notes and today's agenda are approved. Thank you. And moving along, I want to hand it over to the California Air Resources Board team, who's going to give the first presentation on risk modeling. Oh, and Domingo will start us off on that.
Thank you, Chuy. All right. So,
Melissa, you can go ahead and share your screen.
All right, thanks, Chuy. Let me share. Can everyone see the screen? Great.
It's up. Thank you, Melissa. So, first of all, I wanted to start off our presentation by thanking everybody who has worked on this. We have been working on developing this model for toxic health risk for Portside for quite some time, and it's been a lot of work from our Carbs team, also collaborating with the Port and the APCD team, but also with this steering committee and also with the SERP MCAS implementation subcommittee, who has been providing input on the presentation and on the information that you will receive tonight. So I just wanted to set the stage by bringing us back to our initial goals for the SERP. This exercise of developing this modeling came as a result of actions in the SERP, and in particular, we wanted to accomplish the goals of presenting the cumulative cancer risk for the Portside communities from this modeling, and then using that information to establish risk reduction goals for the community. So this is one step in this direction, and we will continue to work through the SERP MCAS subcommittee, and then also with this committee to establish those goals and then on next steps. But again, just wanted to thank everybody, because there's been a lot of work going into this, and I'm sure you'll be able to appreciate that as we go through the slides. Next slide, please. As you may recall, as we were getting ready to do this, to work on this model, we consulted with the steering committee to see what are some of the objectives, or what are some of the questions that we're trying to answer with this exercise, so that we're able to really focus our efforts and make sure that we're meeting the expectations. So Carbs staff worked with SDAPCD to gather input from the steering committee and identify the objectives that you see on the screen for the modeling of health risks from toxic emissions. And so the goals were to assess cumulative population exposure and health risk from toxic pollutants in the Portside community and track progress towards the reduction of risk, quantify the relative contribution of different emission sources, including those located outside of the Portside community, identify geographic areas with higher pollution burden and identify the sources of emissions responsible for the greatest health risks, help identify strategies for reducing exposure and health risk from those sources identified as causing the greatest risk, help prioritize health risks and resources to address health risks from different sources, complement data from the monitoring network, and then further inform the cancer risk reduction goals for the Portside community. So these objectives inform the scope of the modeling exercise and also define the next steps that we will be working on. So I really want us to, to always, as you hear the information tonight, we're going to be going back to these objectives to make sure that, we are identifying which objectives are being met with the different components of the model. So I just wanted to highlight that for everybody. And at this point, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to our colleagues at Carb. And Melissa, you can take it away.
All right. Thanks, Domingo. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for getting us started. My name is Melissa Venasek, and I'm a member of the Atmospheric Modeling and Support section here at CARP. So tonight, my colleague Sue from the Regional Risk Modeling section and I will be presenting CARB's regional and local risk modeling for the Portside community. And as Domingo mentioned, over the past few weeks, we have been working closely with the district, the Portside Community Subcommittee, and the port to prepare this presentation. So our hope is that the details and results here are helpful in targeting goals and developing plans for the community emissions reduction program. And in order to help facilitate the meeting, we have put together a reference sheet that contains links to web pages and a list of acronyms. So I'm going to share that right now with the chat. We will also pause throughout the presentation, but if something is unclear or it's not as direct as it could be, feel free to ask questions directly or through the chat box so one of our team members can help answer them. All right, so for today's presentation, we're going to break it down into two main parts. First, I will go through an overview of CARB's toxic modeling objectives and how they work with the Community Steering Committee goals. With this first part, we will expand on the emissions inventory used, the various sources, how they were developed, how it was processed for modeling applications, and how the domain is visualized. And then we'll summarize the major contributors to cumulative population-weighted average risk, highlighting updates to the inventory and future work that is currently being done. And then for the second part, Sue will go into a deep dive of the modeling results and provide take-home messages, bringing each piece back to one of the objectives that Domingo just mentioned. So the toxics modeling for San Diego County done at CARB is part of a statewide air quality and toxics modeling program. It supports AB 617, which addresses air pollution impacts in environmental justice communities. Here we track statewide air quality improvements and health risk trends over time as part of a triennial analysis. This work also complements data from the monitoring networks and supports CARB's regulatory development, policies, and other programs. In addition, the toxic modeling conducted helps assist the San Diego Air Pollution Control District and the Portside community in implementing the following two goals. The first goal, or Goal 5, with regional scale modeling, which estimates baseline cumulative cancer risk for the Portside community. And then through the second goal, or rather Goal 6, the community scale modeling, which establishes a local cancer risk reduction goal based on the modeling from Goal 5 and estimates cancer risk at all census tracts from locally generated emissions. So for our work, we are looking at cumulative average cancer risk at the regional level, which includes all sources inside and outside of the community, as well as at the local level, which includes all sources inside the legally defined Portside community boundary. And so I want to emphasize here and throughout the presentation that our modeling is not done at the HRA level like the ports analysis that they will discuss in the next presentation, but rather our work is done at the census block level and weighted by population. So this allows us to look at an overall or cumulative average risk of the region from all sources, therefore supporting these goals 5 and 6 and assisting in developing plans to reduce that risk in the future. But in reality, if you live extremely close to a source that emits a high amount of toxic pollutant, or rather near source, then the risk will be different. So with that said, to accomplish these two goals, we need to prepare an emissions inventory that's suitable for use in modeling applications. In reality, it's extremely difficult to capture the day-to-day variation of emissions that make up a region, even as small as a local community, due to the thousands of different sources that can contribute to our air quality each day. So when we develop a modeling inventory, we have to make assumptions that kind of mimic the ideal day as best as scientifically possible. And as an example, our emissions inventory help build a prediction of reality, and they're used for planning and prioritizing purposes, but they don't necessarily capture that real life variability that you would see when there is a backup of cars on I-5 due to an accident, or even the emissions that you emit when backing up out of your own driveway. So first, I'm going to break down the 4 main categories of sources that we think about when building an inventory. And then on the next slide, I will talk about the scale used in our risk modeling and assumptions that we have to consider when using that inventory for modeling applications. So first, we have stationary sources. These emissions are from fixed locations with a known latitude and longitude, things like power plants and industrial facilities. Then next, we have area-wide sources. These are emitted from sources that spread out over a wide area and are hard to pinpoint to one specific location. These are things like construction activity or agricultural equipment. Now, sometimes the emission estimates for area-wide sources overlap with the emissions reported by a facility or stationary source. As an example of this are landfills. Landfill emissions are estimated at the county level, but for larger facilities, they also are reported as a stationary source. And so in those cases, we perform a process called point source reconciliation. So for example, the reported emissions from a landfill with a known latitude and longitude are subtracted from an area-wide county estimate so that the emissions are not double counted. So moving on then, we also have on-road or mobile sources. And so here we have to estimate the average activity for passenger cars, trucks, and motorcycles on a roadway network. And then last but certainly not least, we look at off-road mobile sources or things like cargo handling equipment, anything that isn't necessarily on the road network. Now, the emissions inventory that we received needs to be processed so that a model can use it. And because this is a simulation and we are trying to mimic an ideal day, and our model is looking at the cumulative risk, we have to make assumptions. So let's take a look at all of the sources that go into our modeling inventory and break it down by layer. So the first thing I think of when building these a modeling emissions inventory is a box. Now, here in our virtual world, we start with drawing a box for our regional domain, which is outlined in purple. This box covers the entirety of San Diego County. It also includes some of Riverside, a portion of Imperial, Mexico, and it also extends out into the ocean. I'm sorry, let me go back here. All right, and it also extends out into the ocean, covering the region that includes the first 24 nautical miles offshore. Now, we have to fill this box out with emissions. So going back to our 4 source categories, the easiest source to visualize, which I kind of set up already, are known stationary sources or facility locations. These are facilities that we know the latitude and longitude for, so we can place them throughout the box. Now, thinking about our area-wide and off-road sources, emissions are estimated using a top-down approach, meaning the estimates are made for the entire county of San Diego. So it's our job to then take that larger estimate and place the emissions inside of the box in order to simulate the most real-life representation of those sources that we can. And in order to do this, we use gridding. So here I'm going to continue building into my box of emissions. Here we are placing emissions of diesel particulate matter for locomotives and commercial hovercrafts into smaller grids. So essentially taking this larger box and cutting it down into smaller pieces. And we do this through the use of spatial surrogates. Spatial surrogates place a certain fraction of that county-wide total to a specific grid cell based on land use and socioeconomic data. So as I continue to build my box, some of the offered mobile sources, such as ocean-going vessels, get pretty complex to represent inside. So we have annual emission estimates for transit, maneuvering, and at berth for different types of ships and vessels. And in order to represent it inside of the box, we use vessel traffic data collected by the US Coast Guard to simulate a simple set of polygon features that disperse the emissions throughout the ocean. Now, for on-road or mobile source emissions, we use link level estimates to model average on-road activity throughout the county on the major road network. We also include emissions from Mexico, as transboundary flow from neighboring Mexico cities impact many local San Diego communities. And then we finished building our box by including all other area sources, such as agricultural equipment, construction, TRUs, and the rest of the Mexico area and point sources that stem from the Mexico National Emissions Inventory. So this fills out our domain at the regional level. And as you can see at the regional level, there are many sources that may impact the health risk all across San Diego County. When we analyze the local emissions from inside the Portside community, we first look at the emission study boundary, which was developed by snapping a boundary to the 1 kilometer grid cells within the larger domain. Then our modeling team clips the emissions by following the official Portside community boundary highlighted in red to look at the specific source size inside of the Portside area. This boundary was developed based on census tract information by the Community Steering Committee, district staff, and CARB. And it has been designated as the formal Portside community boundary within AB 617 as defined on CARB's website. And so that was used as the basis for the local modeling boundary. Now, because our emissions inventory is built using a top-down approach, we start with our larger San Diego regional domain and then zoom into the Portside community to understand the local emissions. But one thing I'd like to note here is that we aren't changing the scale, even though we are zooming into the Portside community. The scale stays the same. Our grid cells are developed at the 1 kilometer level, and our modeling is done at the census block and weighted by population. So this allows us to obtain an overall or cumulative average risk of the local community sources, therefore supporting Goal 6 and assisting in developing plans to reduce that risk in the future, which will be highlighted by the modeling results in the upcoming slides. So focusing on the local emissions, I will rebuild the inventory inside this zoomed in version of the box, adding the defined community boundary and then each source category one at a time, starting with stationary sources, locomotives, commercial hovercraft, ocean-going vessels, on-road activity, Mexico, and all other sources. So looking as each individual layer of emissions is added to the region, you can see how complex the different source categorization can get. And again, the red line here represents the Portside community boundary based on that census tract data and population. So since the community boundary doesn't align with the 1 kilometer grids, the fraction of the grid cell that falls into the boundary was used. And this reduces the overall amount of emissions analyzed in the local modeling study. But from this zoomed in picture, you can see how various sources may impact the local modeling from inside the boundary, such as locomotives, as well as sources that may impact the regional modeling from outside the boundary, such as Mexico. So I'm going to take a moment and pause. And I also hear some background noise if we can mute. Now, I know I've gone through a lot of information regarding how the emissions inventory was developed and how it's visualized in our modeling domain. So I'd just like to check in if anyone has any questions with these slides. John, yes, I see your hand. I think you're muted.
Now, does your information also include the LA and Long Beach basin when the north wind is blowing south? Because in the past, there's been considerable amount of pollutants being blown down here. And then in the afternoon, when our wind comes up, it blows from the west to the east. And back 50 years ago, this place used to be grayish black, just off the coast. And I know there's still some out there, but I wanted to show something. And so when you get a moment, I would like to show some of the particulate matter that I've actually collected from my sleep app machine, showing exactly in real life what I have. So when you have a moment or an opportunity, if you could call on me again, I have it right here with me.
Sure. To answer your first question regarding the LA emissions, so I'm going to go back to our regional modeling. And so we do include a small portion of Orange and Riverside, but it does not extend all the way up to LA. But this is in our 1 kilometer grids also, our large defined box. So this really breaks it down at a pretty fine resolution. And then Domingo, maybe we can set up some time later for John to share. I'm not sure if he has the sharing capabilities, but I'm going to ask if anyone else has any other questions right now. And then
yes, I see that Sharon raised her hand in the attendee list. So Sharon, you should be able to unmute now.
Question, Melissa. With CARB, are you looking at the airport separately? We obviously know the emissions, there's airport, and that's very close to the barrio and such. So I was just wondering, how does that fold into all this? Because as you know, as the wind blows and such, so how does that fold into the CARB plan?
Yeah, so our airport emissions are represented in that kind of other category. Specifically for this representation, we're looking at diesel particulate matter. And so this is specific to diesel PM emissions, but our modeling is comprehensive. And so we are looking at all of the criteria pollutants. And then we speciate TOG and PM to look at some of the more toxic pollutants. And so that aircraft activity is covered in the technically other category.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now handing it over to Jack. And then, oh, I see that Becky lowered her hand.
Thanks, Chewy. Melissa, my question is with regard to that category of ocean-going vessels. Can you talk about what's included in that group? What type of vessels?
Yes. So we have emissions for at berth, maneuvering, and transit, and that's so commercial as well as passenger. And I'm not sure if our ocean-going vessel expert Mark Hickson is actually on the meeting, but we have a summary of everything that how those emissions are developed. I don't know if Leo wants to touch base on that a little bit more.
Yeah, we also, this is Leo Ramirez. We also, yeah, we have tankers and then roll on, roll off. I mean, essentially all the categories covering the planning inventory are included. We could provide like a list after, the meeting, like a comprehensive list of what's included. But essentially, yeah, we have the modes: transit, maneuvering, at berth, and anchoring, and then like the different vessel types that are, covered by the planning emissions inventory.
So so is sport fishing vessels included in that?
That's not part of ocean-going vessel. That's a different category, but we also have that one included. That's part of fishing and commercial. Yeah, correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is also included.
The commercial harbor craft. Sorry to cut you off there, Leo. So that's in a different section.
So sport fishing is included in the commercial harbor craft category?
Correct.
So I understand there was the misunderstanding until recently about the operation of those vessels, where I think CARB was under the impression that a majority of the operation time for the sport fishing vessels was spent in San Diego Harbor, or at least in close proximity, when in fact it turned out that more like 85% of the time was spent well out to sea. Has that been corrected, and is that reflected in these emission reports?
So that's a good question. We're going to actually touch base on how our inventories are kind of a snapshot in time when we are given them. There's additional research going on in parallel, and so what we're working with represents the current vintage from our CPM version 1.03, or I'm sorry, 1.01, which I'll explain on a slide in a little bit, there are updates that are going to be made into this baseline inventory, and those should reflect the updates from the commercial hovercraft emissions for that category.
So if I understand that right, this is something that has yet to be done, and then they're not reflected in the current, or is that coming later in the report? Maybe I jumped the gun.
I would have to definitely like double check if what you're specifically referencing was included in this or if it wasn't. And so that would take some time to like actually look into what was the EICs and the codes and everything. But for this particular snapshot, for this particular presentation, it was based on the CPM version 1.01. So that's why I can't give like a formal yes or no, because I would have to look what was included in that. Okay, so can you get back to us on that? Because I mean, that was definitely a pretty significant finding, I think, in terms of the operation of that watercraft and where it operated and the amount of time it spent operating both in port and at sea, which would really skew the data with regard to emissions, be they in San Diego Harbor or Pear side or miles and miles out to sea. I think that would make a huge difference. So yeah, if you all could come back to let us know on that would be great. Absolutely. Thank you.
And sorry, this is Domingo. I just wanted to point out there's a question on the chat. If does ocean-going vessels include Navy vessels?
Yes, it does. We do have military ocean-going vessels included in our modeling.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to, if there's no other questions, I'm going to keep moving. Okay, so so moving forward and actually kind of touching base on Jack's question, when we receive the emissions inventory, we like to think of it as a snapshot, as other researchers are also working in parallel to improve the methodology that develops the emission estimates, reporting structure, and sources. And so for this study, we started modeling with our CPM version 1.01 base year 2017 vintage. Now, new methodologies and a new vintage baseline have been developed since our regional modeling began. And in addition, various regulations and state strategies are on the books to be implemented in future years. This will result in the reduction of emissions for certain sectors when analyzing future years. So for an example, looking at the trend of diesel PM emissions, this plot illustrates how diesel PM emissions are projected to change between our current baseline and a new baseline future year for 2037. So here we have the major sources that contribute to diesel PM normalized to 1 in order to show the fraction of each major source makes up for our base year, and then what is projected for our future year. Now, CARB has a variety of state strategies on the books, implementing new regulations such as heavy-duty I&M to reduce on-road diesel PM emissions. So looking in the future, DPM will be reduced from mobile sources, highlighting the need to look at some of the other source categories that aren't projected to reduce emissions as much, such as ocean-going vessels and TRUs. So before we do a deep dive into the full modeling results, we kind of wanted to start off with a summary of our findings. So overall, we found that the majority of the cumulative average risk from the community and outside sources is from diesel PM. And what we really want to emphasize here is that these results are based on the 2017 baseline year, and they are calculated at the census block level and weighted by the population average in order to support goals 5 and 6. And so thinking about these results further, because there is a projection of reduced diesel PM emissions in our future year inventory, we do expect the total risk associated with diesel PM to decrease. highlighting the need to focus on sectors that are either growing or not changing between the baseline and future years, such as I mentioned previously, ocean-going vessels and TRUs. So again, with that, I'm going to stop, check for any questions, and then hand off to Sue to kind of go into the second part of the presentation, which really shows a deep dive into the modeling results.
Thanks, Melissa. So let me quickly share my.
John raised his hand real quick for a question.
Yes, John.
I was just wondering whether or not, because we were covering this area and my information here has to do with that, whether or not I should do it now so it's more, if you will, appropriate with this particular.
John, I think it because the entire presentation will focus on just Portside. So I think just to help with the flow of the information, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing it at the end of the presentation.
Not a problem.
Would that be okay? All right.
Not
thank
a problem.
you.
Thank you, John. Okay. Melissa, I think, could you?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Okay. Hopefully you can all see my slide.
Yes.
Thank you. And now putting the presentation mode. Okay, great. So as Melissa mentioned earlier, the main goals that we hope our results can help reach are to assess the cumulative health risk from regional and local pollutants for the Portside community. And so to get a good estimate of the total impact from all the toxics that we are modeling, our original model was done with a combination of two models, the CalPUF for the more inert species, such as diesel PM and heavy metals, and CMAC for the more chemically reactive toxic VOCs. The total health exposure and risk we will present are the sum of the risk from all these toxics from both models. And we'll also look at how they compare to each other in terms of relative contribution to total risk. Another aspect of the goals our results can help with is to identify which sources are currently impacting the community the most in terms of air toxics, and which sources should be prioritized when developing future emission reduction plans. And we'll see in the next slides that these two are not necessarily the same. So to help identify the major sources, we modeled each pollutant and emission category that Melissa showed earlier inside and outside of the community boundaries separately so that we can track each of their relative contributions for both regional and local generated pollutants. On this slide here, we show the cumulative diesel PM concentrations from all sources of diesel PM within the San Diego County on the left-hand side map, and the corresponding cancer risk on the right-hand side map. So when I say cumulative cancer risk, it represents the probability of a person developing cancer if they are exposed continuously to the pollutant over a lifetime in units of cases per million. And per OEHA, which stands for Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment Guidelines, it is calculated assuming here a 30-year exposure, and it takes into account population information, toxicity of the pollutants, typical breathing rate, etc. We also show here a zoomed-in map of the cancer risk in the community, which we will take a closer look at in the next slide. The community boundary is outlined here in blue. These results can help with the goal of assessing cumulative health risk from air pollutants in the community. And as Melissa mentioned earlier, the results shown here are different from HRA studies, and so what is estimated here are cumulative average cancer risk at the center of census blocks. And because concentrations can decrease very rapidly as a person moves away from a particular source, the values we see here are different from what you would see from a hotspot program, which looks at peak risk very close to a particular source. So in other words, what these maps are showing is not what a single person may experience at a certain place, rather it's a cumulative risk from all surrounding sources and estimated at the census block level. Okay, so moving on, in addition to the cumulative impact from diesel PM that we saw on the last slide, here we look at the relative contribution of each toxic species and to the total cancer risk. So diesel PM sources accounted for about 84% of total risk for the community, followed by 15% from all the VOCs and around 1% from all the heavy metals. The risks are higher in the northwest portion of the community, and that's due to the accumulated impact from highways, commercial hovercraft, TRUs, locomotives, and other emission sources. We wanted to point out here that because there are over thousands of blocks in the community, the relative contributions that we show on the right is based on a population weighted average over all the census blocks of the whole community. So what a particular person may experience will largely depend on what their nearby sources are. And so even though heavy metals and VOCs account for a smaller percentage for the community as a whole, they can have a higher impact for a person who is next to a particular source. For example, for someone who's standing a few meters away from a chrome plating facility. So again, what we're presenting here are risks at the centers of census blocks and the population weighted average on the right. In addition, as we saw from Melissa's slides earlier, risk levels by air toxic and their relative contributions are projected to change, which we will see in more detail on the next slides. So another goal our results may help with is quantifying the relative contributions of different emission source categories to total risk, which can then help identify which sources are impacting the communities the most for 2017 and in future years. We're focusing on diesel PM here because it's the one that's been identified as the largest in terms of air toxic. And for 2017, on-road mobile sources contributed the most to total diesel PM risk in the community, with off-road mobile sources as a close second, mostly commercial hovercraft, transport refrigeration units, and locomotives. However, as Melissa showed at the beginning, there are large changes in emissions happening from future and recent emission reduction strategies, including large reductions in on-road mobile sources, which significantly impact their relative contributions to total risk in future years. So this second stat bar chart shows the predicted relative contribution of the same source categories, but for 2037, based on the projected emission changes from 2017 to 2037, and assuming similar other conditions such as meteorology and dispersion conditions. So we can see that in 2037, total diesel PM cancer risk in the community is projected to reduce to around 39% of what 2017 risk was. And the on-road sector within San Diego is no longer the main contributor to total risk. Contributions from commercial hovercraft, ocean-going vessel, and other area sources, TRUs, and on-road emissions from Mexico become equally important in terms of diesel PM. Now that we have an overall idea of what the pollutants and what sources are contributing the most to the total risk inside the community, we'll now take a look at how much sources within the community boundaries contributed to the total. In other words, comparing local generated risk to total risk, which can help support goal number 6 of the emission reduction plan. Okay. So first, from the point of view of assessing cumulative health risk from air pollutants in the community, but from local sources only, shown here on the left is a map of the total risk that resulted from diesel PM, VOCs, and heavy metal sources within the community boundaries. And as you would expect, risk levels are lower than what we saw when all the sources outside and inside the communities were included. And you may remember from the beginning of the presentation, for diesel PM, around 1/3 of total risk in community resulted from local sources. And similar to what we saw for the regional sources, the contribution from diesel PM to total risk is the largest, followed by VOCs, and heavy metals risk stay small at around 1%, primarily from stationary sources. And in the next slides, we will quantify the relative contribution of each emission category to each of those toxics. Starting with DPM. So on-road mobile sources, namely the interstate 5 and 15, state roads 54 and 75, and local roadways, all accounted together for about a little more than half of total diesel PM risk, primarily from I-5 that runs through the community. However, similar to what we saw for the regional sources, when we apply the recent and future emission reductions to project the risk to 2037, the impacts from sectors other than the on-road mobile sources become dominant, such as local sources of TRU, ocean-going vessel, at berth, and other area sources.
Could you slow down just a little bit so the interpreter can catch up?
Oh, yes, sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay. So now going into the VOCs, the so-called other area sources were dominant of all the source categories. And this category includes stationary area sources, such as auto body shops and gas stations, which are modeled as aggregated area sources. Similarly, for heavy metals, stationary sources were the main contributor, with some minor contributions from on-road mobile sources and some area sources as well. I'd like to mention here that other teams at CARB are currently working on improving the on-road mobile related heavy metals emission inventory, such as chromium-6, and the updated inventory will be included in future regional toxic modeling. I'm gonna conclude here with some take-home messages. So our team at CARB estimated average cumulative exposure and associated cancer risk in the San Diego County and the Portside community at the census blocks level. We modeled the impact from regional and local emissions separately, which can help inform SERP goals number 5 and 6, and help identify the sources of greatest risk and prioritize resources. For the 2017 base year modeling, diesel PM was the main contributing pollutant of total average risk when we consider the community as a whole. However, as mentioned previously, individual risk at the localized scale is highly dependent on the proximity to emission sources, and VOCs and heavy metals can generate high local risk at certain locations. Overall, toxic pollutants emitted within the community boundaries accounted for about 38% of total risk in Portside community. When identifying priorities and developing strategies to reduce risk, it is very important to take into consideration the recent and future changes in emissions, because as we saw earlier, these major projected changes shift the current dominance of diesel PM from on-road mobile sources to other sectors, such as ocean-going vessels, transport refrigeration units, area and stationary sources of VOCs and heavy metals. And I'm gonna stop here and we'll welcome any questions.
So much. And just a reminder for folks who have questions, please raise your hand and we can call on you. And to get us started, Joy Williams.
Hi, thank you, both of you, for those great presentations and all that explanation of what you did with the modeling. I have a couple of comments, and one I think I made, when you presented at the subcommittee level, and that's that for the purposes of setting the goal for reduction of health risk for locally generated pollutants, I think it does make sense to include the emissions that are from the harbor area, the waterfront area, and as far as how you would do that practically, I guess looking at your earlier maps, I think, that the area inside the yellow outline rather than the red outline would be, what I'm talking about. And I think, the reason for that would be that the reason we wanted a goal that was addressed to the locally generated emissions was that we can't deal with all the regional pollution within the SERP. So we wanted to focus on what's our goal for reducing health risk due to locally generated emissions that could be addressed from within the SERP. And clearly the port-related emissions are a big part of that. And, to their credit, the port has stepped up in a big way to identify a plan and measures to reduce those emissions. And we do expect to see significant emission reductions in the commercial harbor craft and ocean-going vessel categories in particular, within the next 5 years, within the time frame of the SERP. So I think it only makes sense to include those, as part of the locally generated pollution that will be addressed in that goal. So that was one comment that I had, and I want to make sure the community's got a chance to weigh in on that too. I mean, do they agree that those emissions are part of Portside for the purposes of setting that health reduction goal? I also wanted to just make a comment on your recommendation that we shouldn't be focusing so much on road sources, because we expect that actions at the state level will reduce those quite a bit by 2037. And I just think, we might want to try and get there quicker. So we might think that, trying to see what we can do about on-road traffic generating diesel emissions on local roads is something we can address, within the Portside community. And we might want to, it's not wasted effort to focus on those. So, I'm not entirely sure I completely agree with that conclusion that, we could pretty much not address the on-road pollution. And then just, I'm curious, 38% seems like a lot for locally generated. And I would be curious as to how much that goes up when you add in the port-related emissions. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Joy. We really appreciate them. Just a couple notes on that. We do have all sources in our regional modeling to help with goal 5. And then if Jeremy or Ping wants to comment on the second question, in the second comment, in terms of including those sources in either future modeling or looking at that.
Yeah, I certainly think, so this kind of getting back to what Melissa had said earlier, that this is kind of a snapshot in time. And so at CARB, we do have the intention, sort of, because this is part of our triennial modeling efforts, that we will be updating this modeling. And so a lot of the comments that you're making today are going to be something that we'll go back and kind of and talk about how we incorporate those as we move sort of and look at updates to the modeling analysis in the future.
Okay, what time frame are we talking about for that update?
Well, we haven't even finished the full statewide toxics modeling yet. So that will be finished later this year, and then we'll have to take a step back and think about what the next base year to model would be. So to give you an idea, the whole effort to model the entire state with the triennial modeling is a multi-year effort.
But it's this version that we'll be using to set our health risk reduction goal for the SERP, isn't that right?
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of the regional modeling that we've conducted, and also looking at the tracking the Portside contribution explicitly, as well as the modeling done at the port. So it's going to be kind of a combination of those.
So you're going to be integrating the port's health risk modeling into yours at some point?
No, the two modeling analyses are very different. And so they need to be kind of kept separate, but I think they can be complementary is what I was getting at.
Okay, I guess I'm still not getting how we would, start with the baseline on our locally generated cancer health risk that we'd be looking at, trying to reduce some amount of.
Yeah, that may be a discussion that needs to be had with the district as well as how best to use the modeling that we have at hand.
And we can bring this, sorry, this is Domingo, Joy, and we can bring this discussion back to the subcommittee too, to kind of help us figure some of those points out and see how to best use the information. Because as Jeremy was highlighting, we have this modeling, but then we'll also have the ports HRA, which you will hear about in a little bit too. So we can take a look and see how we use different sources of information to complement each other and then select an appropriate goal.
Okay, thanks, Domingo.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Joy. I wanted to hand it over to Sylvia. Do you still have a question? You had your hand raised.
Thank you, Joy. Just a quick comment. And these are great graphs and tables that are providing us an informative data of what could be done. Hopefully it does get executed properly and effectively. My concern is as a community member or somebody who is not very educated in the type of emissions there are. I know Liliana, and I appreciate the effort of providing me a link to a reference table in regards to the type of emissions. But knowing myself, I like to learn more. So it only gives me an acronym. So perhaps in the future, you guys can provide a little bit more detail of what type of emissions they are and things like that. For someone like me who is very likes to learn more about things. And I know you guys are specialists, so we would appreciate that extra effort when possible, of course. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for that comment, Sylvia. Yeah, definitely we can try and include the type of emission source with those types of acronyms for reference in the future meetings.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'll hand it over to Jack, and then I'll follow up William's question in the chat.
Thanks, Chewy. Just to go back to my original question that I had from Melissa, and I don't really know who to direct it to, and maybe it's more of a comment, but the problem I see, it begins with the importance that the steering committee has put on emissions coming from hovercraft. We've seen some of the sampling station reports, and so there's a lot of concern about what emissions are being emitted over San Diego Bay. The problem I see with the way that some of these emission sources have been lumped together begins with the sport fishing fleet. I don't know how many hundreds of vessels that is, but that fleet doesn't operate in San Diego Bay. People don't go on a sport fishing boat to fish in San Diego Bay. They go out to sea. So yet we have that lumped in with all other harbor craft, when it probably should be in with ocean-going vessels, much like a Navy ship that gets underway and goes out to sea. It doesn't spend time around San Diego Bay, turning and banking and around and doing all that other stuff. It goes straight out to sea. And the sport fishing vessels are exactly the same. So that to me really, I think throws a question I have in what data we're relying on to have a good sense of the emissions that result over San Diego Bay. So I just hope you all at least some point in time could address that.
Thanks, Jack. We will definitely look into that. Oh, sorry, thought I was still muted. No, we will definitely look into that. And to kind of address your question on how those emissions are allocated, we do use AIS data to spatially allocate the commercial hovercraft vessels depending on the type or description. So for instance, the sports fishing would be allocated using AIS data for pleasure crafts. And a lot of those do get placed out into the ocean away from the harbor. Based on that data. And so maybe offline, or we can take a look at it because it is really detailed to get into. We can look at that information together. And if there's other data sources that we can utilize to kind of help improve those methods, I'd be happy to look at them and help get that into our emissions inventory process.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I wanted to see if you all could quickly answer William Duvall's question on how does the methodology of this study compare to the latest South Coast AQMD MATE study? It sounds like Ping could explain the difference offline.
I think he's saying it's probably like very detailed to go over like in a minute or two. I'm not sure if we'll be able to give like a minute.
Well, this is Jeremiah. I mean, I think the biggest difference, and Ping can chime in because he probably knows more of the details on this if I say something that's wrong, is that the South Coast MATE study was done using, I believe it was just photochemical modeling. So it was with our analysis, we're using two different models. We're using the CMAQ photochemical model to look at toxic VOCs, but we're using a dispersion model to look at diesel PM and metals. And I think from the South Coast MATE study, that was all done with the photochemical modeling. And the advantage to our approach is that you can get much higher resolution in terms of source to receptor relationships. Whereas if you use a grid model, then everything is going to be done at sort of an area average, if that makes sense. That's my very high level that may not make any sense, but difference between them.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Moving along, I have John Alvarado, followed by Janice Reynoso.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on what Jack Munger had to say. You know, I'm 72 years old and I've spent most of my life on these waters as a commercial fisherman, as through the Good Neighbor Project, where I take literally hundreds of kids fishing out on these boats. And I can tell you this, most people who have never spent any time in the water have no idea that most of these boats, when they do go out, if they're close on shore, they're anchored. They're not even running, okay? And when they do leave the port, they're going to Mexico, or they're going, you know, I mean, parts that are hundreds of miles from here. When I used to go fishing, we would fish the Cortez Banks, which is over 100 miles from here. So I really agree with Jack that, you know, including them into the port, gosh, they spend, I think, maybe 10 to 15 minutes to go to the bait barge, and another 10 minutes, they're gone, period. And I'll kind of leave it with that. And when you're ready to call on me on the other, I would appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Moving along to Janice. We can't hear you, Janice. Can anyone else hear Janice?
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, gracias. Well, just that the comparison just threw me off a little bit, or a lot. My understanding is that when Navy boats are parked, they are releasing emissions. So that comparison, right? Am I correct to say that?
I think there are different types of boats that would be releasing emissions, kind of how John was describing versus other like bigger boats that would be at berth. But I think someone else could be more qualified to answer that.
Yeah, the Navy ships, was it Jack that mentioned that when they're parked there, but they really don't contaminate because they travel elsewhere when they go on missions. But my understanding is while they are parked in the Navy base, that they are a source of contamination.
Yeah, so
No,
I can, oh, sorry,
I can
go ahead.
actually answer that. I can tell you that for over 40 years, the Navy has been hooking up its ships to electrical connections and turning off all their boilers and equipment like that, that are the emission issues. So this has been going on for decades, and they do that today as a standard practice. As soon as they come along Pear side, they shut down.
It was,
Okay, so
this Domingo, I just wanted to point out too that was one of the early actions that was committed to by the Navy too as part of the SURF, was to operate ships at berth to be connected.
Yes, and they're not contaminating the water at that time either.
No, and the reason I say that is there are numerous guidelines and rules and laws that every Navy ship has to follow with regard to any discharge into the bay. They don't send any sort of tank with contaminated material inside it over the side. It has to be pumped out and taken elsewhere for disposition. And that too has been going on since the 70s. So
okay. Thank you for answering my question.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for that. Larry, and then after I have Sharon.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I just want to make a brief comment. I don't know if you can throw up slide number 19, Melissa, but I two brief comments, actually. I think the first is, I just think it's important to recognize that this is the first time, to my knowledge, that the region and the port and the air district and CARB has all worked together to kind of identify what a cumulative health risk was. So I just really want to applaud CARB and their efforts for doing this, and APCD and all of you for participating. I think it's slide 16. So I just think, again, you know, with more information, we can make better decisions and more informed decisions. So again, modeling will always change, it will always vary, but I think it's just a step in the right direction to have this level of information for our region. The second thing I want to maybe talk a little bit, bring up slightly what Joy brought up earlier, is when we look at this particular figure, we can see that a lot of that DPM risk is really concentrated along the interstate highway there. So just a thought, I think going forward, I know the port's in this for the long run, and I assume and I know the Air District is, and I know all of you are, we might want to, as we continue to work on some of the strategies and objectives in the SURF currently, we might also want to think about what can we do to maybe help address some of the emissions associated with the highway there. So that's all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Larry. And moving along, Sharon, you should be able to unmute now to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd like to follow up with what Larry's saying. It's really good this kind of stuff is difficult, it's complicated, and I appreciate that CARB is working with the community, the port, and everybody on looking at what those health risk assessments are. I know the port's done on their own because they only have control of what they have with our tenants that have property and stuff, but it's kind of nice to know the greater good. And I agree with Larry. I mean, we see a lot of things on the freeway. Quite a few years ago, we were looking at doing some things. I think it was when David Alvarez was at District 8, of doing some things around 5 that can actually mitigate some of the emissions that come off Highway 5s. And I don't know if that was ever brought to this committee. And then secondly, is anything being done on the city side? Because there's a lot of deliveries, I'm down in the barrio a lot, that are not even anything to do with the port. Not port related at all. I don't even know what the tier engines that do these deliveries to the Mercado and everything. Is the city of San Diego looking at what they can do as far as what comes into that community as well, making sure that the truck deliveries that come every day to the, for example, to the supermarket and stuff, that those are at least whatever tier engines that they need to be for trucks and stuff?
Hi, so this is Domingo. So the you know, regulation for trucks or for mobile sources, that falls under CARB, and some of those regulations the Air District helps enforce locally. So in that sense, you know, we are looking at emissions from mobile sources as well in the community. From the standpoint of the city, there's also the track routes that the city helps put in place to, you know, minimize or reduce exposure at the community level.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Sharon. I do want to point out that Becky asked a question around whether cruise ships are categorized under the passenger ship category. And Leonardo Ramirez at Carb noted that yes, they are. Any other questions or comments before we move along? None. Great. If we can move along to the Port of San Diego's presentation, part 2 of the modeling presentation for today. And John Alvarado, I do have you still on queue after this presentation.
Great. Are we ready, Chewy?
Yes.
All right. I'll go ahead and get us started. So good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Larry Hoffreiter, and I'm a program director for the Ports Planning Department. I'm joined tonight by Matt McFalls, who's with Ascent Environmental, and he's helped us with a lot of the technical modeling that we'll be discussing tonight. As Domingo noted earlier, one of the objectives in the Port's MCAS, as well as a goal in the SERP, was for the Port to prepare a health risk assessment for its 2 marine cargo terminals to better understand how those emissions affect the public health of nearby community residents. As a reminder, we presented some preliminary health risk information last December, and we've been working hard since that time to update it and refine it based upon the best available science and best available data. Tonight, we'll first be discussing what went into the Port's health risk assessment, including the location of sources and the location of residences. Second, we'll be sharing what the existing baseline cancer risk is based upon actual 2019 activity data. Then we'll talk about the results of the HRA modeling efforts and what we know about them at our 2 marine cargo terminals. And finally, we'll show how we anticipate the health risk will go down over time, given implementation of the Port's Maritime Clean Air Strategy. Next slide, please. So as you can see, these are the 5 primary sources of emissions from the Port's 2 marine cargo terminals. As you can see, our emissions modeling was different than Carbs, largely because our scale was so much different. It's a bottom-up approach, and we looked at all the activity at our 2 marine cargo terminals based upon actual activity that occurred in 2019. As you can see, we accounted for 329 ocean-going vessel calls, 2 assist tugs, 2 commuter ferries. We know that we have 184 pieces of cargo handling equipment operating. There was about 86,000 truck trips associated with both terminals, and we moved about 2.725 million tons of rail. All of this, this baseline information is the same as what was included in the December preliminary assessment that we did back in December, but we did make some modeling adjustments that Matt McFalls will go into in the next slide. Go ahead, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Larry. All right, so based on that previous modeling, based on feedback from that previous modeling from stakeholders and other agencies, Larry and myself and others revise the data based on those that feedback and some assumptions that changed between and some data that changed basically between December of last year and recent weeks. So based on that review, the emission sources that changed are shown here. More high level, the changes reflect data that was maybe not available when we did most of the modeling in fall and early winter of last year, and some feedback related to the trucks. So for the trucks, we extended the range of our modeling for trucks to include freeway travel within the community. And we also gathered some data from maritime staff on truck travel that does not use the designated truck routes. Larry can answer questions about that if they come up. We also had better data, more port-specific data on the fleet, the truck fleet that visits the cargo terminals based on the truck transition plan that's ongoing. For Harborcraft, the changes are a little more minor, just reflects changes in cargo fuel consumption for the tugs. And then between most of that modeling last year and recent weeks, CARB updated some emission factors based on its rulemaking for the Harborcraft rule, which has been talked about related to sports fishing, but it affects some of the emission factors for new engines based on horsepower and model year. So we use that. I can answer questions about that later, but those changes were kind of minor. Same thing with rail. We got some feedback from BNSF. We updated based on more refined and more recent data. Next slide. Let me know if I need to slow down too. I have a habit of talking really quickly. So this is an overview. We're going to go through a couple slides that show the overview of the modeling area. This is similar to what we presented late last year. It is different than the ports or the Carbs modeling because we're more focused on the cargo terminals only. So this slide shows the community boundary, which is in that green, in relation to the two cargo terminals that we're analyzing, shown in purple. Next slide. So same background, so same community, same cargo terminals, but to show two sources, kind of showing them stepwise here. So cargo handling equipment, which only operate within the terminal boundaries, shown in orange, and then the harbor craft, we're only focused on harbor craft that related to cargo movements, which is the assist tugs or tugs that assist cargo vessels going in and out of 10th Avenue and National City, as well as the ferry, the commuter ferry that travels between downtown areas and Coronado, shown there in that darker green. Next slide.
Matt, if you could slow down just a little bit.
I knew I would do that. Thanks for that. All right, here, same background map, green, Portside community, and then the terminals. We're showing a couple sources here. First, in the darker blue is the tug or the ocean-going vessel activity going from National City, 10th Avenue, and then in and out of the bay. So the dark blue is the movement, vessel movement, and then the yellow dots at the terminals represent activity at berth. So while some vessels plug in, there are still emissions that occur from those, the power fans and refrigeration and other stuff that happens on these vessels. And then the rail is shown in that brown. There's kind of two different rail modes. One is switching, which is basically building the trains and stacking them and putting cars and or cargo on them, which is in that dark brown circle. And then the line haul, which is basically trains moving in and out of the terminals and to regional destinations, shown in that brown line that goes up north. Next slide. Spend a little more time on this one. Trucks, heavy duty trucks, be used interchangeably here. So same background map. We have two different colors shown that represent the sources. The gray represents the sources that were shown and discussed in the December health risk presentation. So that's the designated truck routes in and out of the terminals to the freeway themselves. And then previously we had stopped the emissions there. We have the yellow routes shown here, which are the new sources that we added in. So there's two things to look at: is the surface streets, that the non-designated truck route surface streets, we can talk about later in Q&A if you guys want, that basically show some truck activity going in and out of the terminal, specifically 10th Avenue, that we're not using the routes that we had modeled before. It's not a very big portion of trucks, but we modeled them. And then the freeway activity, so I-5, I-15, and then I-5 also both northbound and southbound. So northbound going in and out of National City and 10th Avenue, and then southbound going in and out of both those terminals as well. And then I-15 for destinations for cargo that moves to Riverside and beyond. So we extended the freeways basically to around the Portside boundary, went a little bit past that just to make sure that we're covering all the receptors and all the residences that could be within that. Next slide. Carbs spent some time on this, on what is cancer risk. A little refresher, because our approach is a little different. The values, again, like Carbs approach, represent a probability or a likelihood. Risk values are presented in chances per million. However, unlike Carbs presentation, the modeling here is not population weighted. So instead, we base risk on the maximum location within each community. We modeled residences, parks, and schools. And in this presentation, we present the maximum location within those communities. So it can be a single receptor point. It is not population wide. It is meant to be health protective. And it's kind of meant to be consistent with the approaches that some of the community members may have seen in previous CEQA documents for 10th Avenue and others, as well as what we presented in December. Also keep in mind, this is health protective. The approach here consistent with what CARB presents. The WIHA, the state agency that develops this guidance, the approach is basically you're exposed to this DPM or these emissions 24 hours a day, 350 days a year for 30 years. And so that's the health protective nature of this modeling. And just an FYI, and also just we did, like I said, we did present schools and parks, or we did model schools and parks, but this presentation is focused only on residences because the exposure and the risk is higher at residences than it is at schools and parks. Next slide. So let's get into the fun part, the results. So we'll start with our baseline analysis, and then Larry will talk about the future. So a reminder that the risk here shown in these tables, left is English, right is Spanish, that the risks here are the maximum exposed locations within these communities. Also note that it's only based on cargo movements. Our cargo movements at the terminals, so the numbers are lower than what CARB presents, and that's due to the nature of what's being included. They're including more community-wide, region-wide emissions. We're focused only on DPM emitted associated with cargo movements in and out of 10th Avenue and National City. So now to results. Top left in order, the highest risk in our modeling area, modeling domain, is National City at 20.6 per million, followed by Barrio Logan at 19.7, downtown at 18.9, and then Coronado at 16.0. I'll talk about this a little bit more on slides that follow. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide is a representation, or is a graphical representation of the modeling results shown in the previous slide, but for every receptor point in our modeling domain. So it's similar to a couple graphics that Cara presented, which showed that the higher concentrations near the freeways. Also note that the cutoff here is 10 per million to make a cleaner map. So areas that are not shaded in yellow or brown are either were not modeled or are below 10 per million, just for presentation purposes. So our modeling, the entire modeling area is shown on the left in relation to the terminals and in relation to the Portside boundary. And then on the right, we kind of zoom in on two communities to kind of show where the max location is. So top right, you see Barrio Logan. A little hard to see where the maximum location is. It's in that area, but it's near National Avenue, and it's in a location basically that's near both the terminal and the freeway. Bottom right, National City. Similarly, it's a location that's kind of tucked between the terminal and the freeway, so it gets daytime emissions essentially from the terminal, and it gets nighttime emissions essentially from the truck activity on the freeway. Next slide. Still talking baseline, still talking 2019. We show a pie chart that shows the relative contribution to that maximum risk by source. And so top left, you can see that National City, the highest contribution is from rail, 43%, shown in brown, followed by vessels, combined adverse and movements in blue, and both CHG, cargo handling equipment, and truck activity at 8% each, shown in orange and in gray, respectively. Same color scheme throughout, by the way, so hopefully that helps, makes it easier to follow. Top right, Barrio Logan, the source contribution. Highest risk is cargo handling equipment, followed by vessels, and then rail in brown. Bottom left, downtown, the highest contribution is from rail, very similar to what we presented in December 2021, followed by vessel activity in blue, and then commercial harbor craft, both tugs and ferries in that aqua green color. And then bottom right, Coronado, maybe a little bit of a mix, little different mix than we presented in December. Largest contribution is from vessels moving in and out, followed by or cargo handling equipment at 10th Avenue. And then also followed by hovercraft, both tugs and ferries. And just note that that location for Coronado is basically right on the water. So it's more exposed to 10th Avenue activities than other places in Coronado. All right, on to Larry.
Great, thanks, Matt. Next slide, please, Chewy. So similar to what we did last December, we essentially said, okay, you know what, how will the MCAS goals and objectives help reduce cancer risk in the nearby community? So you can see here for 2026, for commercial hovercraft, we looked at, again, actualizing or implementing the first electric tugboat in San Diego Bay by 2026, as well as doing electric short-run ferries from San Diego to Coronado back and forth. We also looked at our MCAS goal, which was to reduce emissions from cargo handling equipment at 10th Avenue by replacing 20 pieces of the highest emitting pieces of equipment there. We also looked at our truck goal to get 40% zero emission trucks calling to both our terminals by year 2026. And then finally, we looked at ocean going vessels, and we looked at essentially implementing an updated vessel speed reduction program, as well as installing shore power in National City. And again, the MCAS really focused, we have some aspirational goals for 2030, but the MCAS really focuses on kind of the nearer term 2026 goals. Next slide, please. And here you can see, again, we added those 2030 aspirational goals here. So for cargo handling equipment, you can see underlined, we're assuming that 100% of all of our cargo handling equipment is zero emission by 2030, and that all of our trucks that call to both terminals are zero emission by 2030. So then next slide. So taking that into account, you can see in National City, our baseline cancer risk, or the probability over a 30-year period of 20.6 per million drops to about 14.4 per million in 2026 and 11.9 per million in 2030. Barrio Logan, you can see it also decreases from 19.7 to about 11.7 per million in 2026 and a little bit more in 2030. So while we picked 2026 as kind of our check-in year for modeling purposes, we're moving fast on a lot of this stuff. So I want to really emphasize that the Port of San Diego we've heard you, we've heard the community, and we understand the urgency. So with a lot of these items, we're making good progress. The zero emission tug for the Crowley project, we've been assisting with the permitting and the $4 million infrastructure with that. We've been working closely with SDG&E on that. We're targeting to have that in the Bay by May of 2023. For cargo handling equipment, the highest emitting piece of equipment was our mobile harbor crane. The board authorized $14.7 million purchase of 2 zero emission harbor cranes in January, and we're expecting that to arrive summer of next year. In April, for cargo handling equipment again, Dole just acquired another 5 zero emission yard trucks. Our truck goal, yesterday we just put out what's called a request for information, or RFI, to try to attract both public and private partners to site truck charging, zero emission truck charging, both on Port Tidelands and throughout the region. We've been working closely with SDG&E as well as Caltrans on that effort. And then finally, with the ocean going vessels, we're working on our plans to install shore power at that. The board approved shore power at the National City Marine Terminal. The board approved an updated vessel speed reduction program last November. So we're working on getting our ocean carriers to comply with that. That helps reduce emissions. And the other item, and one of the things we'll have to update going forward, is the board approved a bonnet just this month, funding for the bonnet. So the bonnet calculations are not included in these emission reductions. So we still have some work to do on that, but yeah, we're working hard, and I think we're gonna be able to attain a lot of these targets that you see here in 2026, largely because of, again, all of the participation from this subcommittee, and again, direction from our board, and having a MCAS that's getting a lot of attention and support. Next slide. So that concludes our presentation. Matt and I are happy to answer any questions or take down any comments that you all may have. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you, Larry and Matt. And I see Janice has a question or comment.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all of this presentation as well. Thank you, Larry. So I'm seeing that it's a baseline. I'm wondering if the other social determinants of health, as far as the health of residents in National City and Barrio Logan, are taken into account. For example, a good example is COVID, because we're already sick, we already have lack of access to healthy food, we're suffering from other illnesses, which increases our rate to get cancer due to the emissions, right? But we're already at risk. So is this a baseline? Because I'm seeing the difference in Coronado. Folks there might have access to healthy food, green space, all this other stuff. So is that taken into consideration here? This is just a baseline. That's what concerns me, is that our rates might be even higher because we're already sick from the other like environmental, factors. Absolutely. And a lot of planning things that we're going through, even if we don't count the air quality, right? Yeah. So that's the part where it's like, yes, it's a sense of urgency, and I'm really glad that you're naming it, but I just really want to put that out there, that just like before COVID hit, we were already, struggling, and because it came into place, then we were the ones that suffered the most from that. Other factors as well, like chronic stress and things that we're dealing with because of poor planning in our neighborhoods. So I just want to put that out there, that indeed it is a baseline, that the numbers might even be higher. We're more susceptible, being that if you were to go and put contaminants in another community, say in La Jolla, they already have a lot of advantages, right? And so it's, even if it's a baseline, but us, we're just even that far back. So I feel like those numbers, if that can even be accounted for, if someone's doing that work, it might be higher because we're more susceptible.
Understood, Janice, and thank you very much for the comment. And I'd have to agree with you that the modeling does not necessarily account for maybe some of those additional variables that are, suffered, particularly in National City or Barrio Logan. But I can tell you from the port standpoint, I mean, one, excess cancer risk is too high. So I think it's a good comment. I'm glad you made it and you put it on the record. While we don't have the sophistication, I think, to model those variables, I think it's something that we're well aware of. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. And next on the queue, I have John Alvarado, followed by Sharon.
Yes, and Janice, I also want to thank you so much for bringing that up. That was absolutely spot on. What I find interesting, though, is Coronado has 16%. Now, the prevailing wind here in San Diego is from the west to the east, okay? So what does that tell you with a risk that is as high as 16% in Coronado? It tells me one thing: we're getting a lot more offshore material than I think we believe. Okay, and to me, there's no argument against that, having, like I said, been on the water for so many years. And it comes from up north, and it comes from down south, from Mexico. Okay. The Chinese freighters that come into Mexico all the time, I mean, they're burning fuel like you cannot believe. And I know this for a fact because I used to be a government contractor for President Portillo in Mexico when he was president. The other thing that I want to point out is that there are some, if you will, already laws on the books. Larry, you and I have already talked about this. And I'll go into a little more detail afterwards, but Janice, thank you so much, because we have so many people that are currently ill, okay, and need help today, not tomorrow, but today, because their lives are in the balance right now. And as a executive director and founder of the Good Neighbor Project, I work with hundreds and hundreds of kids. And we're going to put them through this? No, I can't do that. I can't. And I thank the port and all the shipyards and everyone who are actually getting behind this thing as a team. I love that. And that's how we're going to overcome, by working together and solving this thing, you know, from all sides. And I really, truly am appreciative of that. And I'll wait to comment on the other afterwards.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it. Moving along to Sharon, I believe you can still unmute yourself.
Thank you. I find the updated health risk assessment very, very good. Appreciate the port doing that. You know, I just wanted to remind everybody, because what I noticed even with the update, even though the trucks came up a little percentage, it's like 4 and 8%. You know, we implemented the clean truck program years before the state of California was doing something. And this, to me, this slide there shows what we've done in that area by having some aspirational goals. When I look at the big pie, the big picture, stuff that our tenants and the port have control over, that we can actually reduce some emissions, stuff that we own, we can actually get some good reductions. So when I look at the slide and look at that, I think, you know, implementing that clean truck program years ago, showing that we were doing good on that section, but there's some other areas that we really can do some really greater good. Gives us a target to look at for the greater good for the community. So thanks to the port.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for the Port of San Diego team? Joy?
Yeah, sorry, had a little trouble unmuting there. First, yes, I just wanted to thank the port for including and incorporating the community's comments on the first draft of the health risk assessment. You know, especially like recognizing the reality that a small number of trucks do not, you know, stick exclusively to the authorized truck routes. So, so that's important. And I just want to acknowledge also the great work you're doing on emission reductions. And all those categories, it's really making big strides. I think it underlines why we want to make sure that those emission reductions and that health risk reduction, you know, does get included and captured in what we're doing in the SERP. So I wanted to mention that. If I had a question, and this probably isn't one that can be answered, you know, in the time we have left here or anything, and it's really a question more for Carb, but looking back at your slide 13, showing that the overall cumulative cancer risk in the area immediately adjacent to the 10th Avenue terminal is over 1,000 per million. So it's hard to reconcile that with the port's health risk assessment showing a maximum, you know, residential health risk of like 19 per million in Barrio Logan. So I just wanted to flag that as something that I don't understand. And it seems like some more looking into how do we reconcile these two health risk assessments and figure out what we think is really going on. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, yeah, thanks, Joy.
Sylvia?
Yes, thank you, Shui. First of all, I want to re-emphasize the extremely efforts that the Port of San Diego and of course the Air Pollution District has been doing since the beginning. I've been very active in that situation, that I've seen that, of course, when I have the opportunity, but behind the scenes, I'm sure you guys are doing an excellent job, and I'm very happy and applaud that, and that has been executed very good. I do have a question for Larry in regards to the the table that you provided in National City. I know we have two very important factors that are, or elements that are being affected. Of course, the rail switching and the freight rail. Do we have any idea how in the future, perhaps, I know we're focusing a lot in the ocean going vessels, which is great. But do we have any solutions in regards to approaching these, the switches of rails?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sylvia. I don't know if you can go back a slide, Chewy, just so we can look at the number. The short answer, Sylvia, is right now, and unfortunately, I don't. But you're right. For National City, one of the big contributions is that freight rail. So again, what this tells me is it tells me that, you know, for the port to work closely with, you know, BNSF and the Federal Rail Administration and others to see how we can, you know, start again partnering like we did with APCD and CARB and our tenants to see if there's ways that we can essentially reduce that freight rail component. We have had some preliminary discussions with BNSF. And they know that change is coming, right? But I think, again, having this information and this data will enable us to continue those conversations with them and hopefully, you know, get them to maybe prioritize, you know, piloting some lower emitting equipment down here in San Diego. That's my goal. But in terms of answer in terms of what to do with freight rail, I don't have a good answer for you right now, but I think that's the value of doing this study is we know based upon what the analysis that's something we need to look into. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Matt. Matt might know something that I don't.
No, I mean, I and that's on, I mean, it's BNSF answered probably on that one, but just one thing to note is for 2026 and 2030, we kept their fleet constant, but we know that they are constantly evolving and replacing locomotives. And when they, you know, scrap an old one, they have to buy a new one, basically. So their fleet is getting cleaner over time. And I know that, I don't know the specifics, but I know they are trying out BNSF and the other regional line haulers are, or nationwide line haulers are testing out battery operated and other fuels right now. But obviously the battery required to get from here to Chicago, for example, which is what they need to do, is gigantic at this point. So it's just, they're just trying here and there. But I do think it'll be an incremental thing. And I mean, BNSF can chime in on that at some point about what they're doing. But it's a lot more than the future is they're doing a lot more than we've captured because none of it's like, you know, prescribed in law or anything. So we haven't modeled all that. But.
Yes, I truly appreciate this analysis because it became a surprise to me when I heard about it. And then I saw this in the graph that, I mean, I'm very close to the train section. And yes, we could hear that at night. But I never expected that would be a great element that is affecting our air quality. So I'm very excited that this has happening. So now we know what's going on, at least an introduction to it. So I'm looking forward for more information to see how we could get this at least, you know, less emissions in the air or anything that could be possible and be done. So thank you so much for your efforts.
Thanks, Sylvia.
I do want to be conscious of time, so I'd like to pass it on to Mr. John Alvarado for your comments, and then afterwards we'll hand it over to Letty from EHC, who will give an update on the Pear program.
Okay, Chewy, I don't know if it's possible for you to increase the size of my shot on the screen so that others can see it more clearly.
Yep, we have you on Spotlight.
Okay, this right here, it's hard to, let's see here. There we go. It's hard to see, but now I sleep with a sleep apnea machine. And these little swatches, if you will, represent 7 to 9 days. I'm supposed to change these filters out every 30 days. Oop. Here we go. I'm supposed to change them out every 30 days. And as you can see, they're quite dirty, okay? And that being said, the one here at the bottom in black, that's the color they're supposed to be, okay? Now, there's already laws on the books. We can resolve much of our problem in our neighborhoods by having what's called whole house ventilation systems. That means the heat and your air conditioning going into the home. It's a unit that hangs off the wall. They run some hoses to it. The air comes into your building, if you will, your home, already clean of all of this, okay? The problem with this right now is the fact that it comes into your house, it gets on your clothes, it gets on, you know, your furniture and everything else in your house. Now, I'm really happy that there's 530 units to go around, but understand this. So grandma and grandpa gets one, that's wonderful. But how about the 5 kids they've been taken care of now, you know, because their parents are out working. They're in the next room over there getting nothing but this, okay? And there are laws on the books that allow us to go ahead and deduct, if you will, for the cost of this kind of equipment off of our taxes. Now, what we need to do is we need to get everyone, you know, who are involved. And I'm talking about all of San Diego, the port, everybody needs to get involved so that we can go ahead and go to Sacramento. And I've already talked to Senator Ben Huesel's office and let them know that we're going to be asking for help because we can't let our children, you know, go through this. And it's a horrible, horrible problem. And I've talked to David Alvarez, Vivian Moreno, everyone is on board. We need to make this happen and we need to do it quickly while the state has, what is it, 70 some odd billion dollars worth of reserves. We need to protect our neighborhood, but most importantly, we need to protect our people, period. And that's what I got to say. And if you want to get a hold of me, the Good Neighbor Project, I'm working with 8 different schools, 2,500 kids and whatnot. And we need to inform their parents and the school districts as a whole, because it's a serious problem. And anyone who wants to get to, if you will, gather up and bunch up, whatever you want to call it, I welcome you because this is our community. My family's been here for over 100 years. I'm on Logan and Sampson, and this is 3 blocks away from the bay. So you can get an idea exactly how much of this stuff is actually, once again.
Thank you, thank you, John.
There you go.
I think the filter, gets caught sometimes.
Okay, folks, it's up to us because if we don't do it, it's our children and our old people that are going to suffer the most. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Moving along to our last item, I do want to flag we might go over a couple minutes over 7, but we do want to make sure we get through this update on the Pear program. So thank you, everybody. Leticia?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I go by Letty, and I'm with Environmental Health Coalition. So yes, I'll be giving you all a short update. Next slide. So I know pretty much everybody here knows who we are, but in case you're new to the team here, Environmental Health Coalition is a grassroots community-based organization. We've been fighting for environmental justice for 42 years now. And basically, we want toxic-free neighborhoods for everyone. We all have the right to live, work, and play in clean, health, and safety and safe neighborhoods. Next slide. These are the communities that we focus our work, mainly City Heights, Better Logan, Logan, Sherman Heights, West National City. We're binational. We have an office and work in the Colonia Chilpancingo y Colonia Murua. Next slide. And so for a little bit of more context in terms of the Pear program, how we were born, if you will, it really came out of the environmental disaster that happened a couple of years ago, right in our backyards, if you will, with the Navy ship Bona Richard being on fire for 4 days. And so all of you already know, I'm preaching to the choir, you all know that we're right in the middle of all these freeways. We have all these toxic facilities right next door, and then we have all these trucks that are zipping through our neighborhoods. So it was thanks to the Port of San Diego and the County of San Diego that have put significant dollars, as you can see from the slide, towards purchasing some equipment that makes life a little better, that makes people's lives, especially those that have asthma and respiratory problems. I actually want to say a lot better, because I've been hearing just wonderful stories, and I'll be able to share that in a little bit. Next slide. So these are the partners. We, like I said, Port of San Diego, the County of San Diego, and who's really on the day-to-day administrating this is the Air Pollution Control District. So I just want to give a big shout out to Nick Cormier. I know you're here, so he'll be able to chime in if needed. Of course, EHC and our two partners with the equipment, IQAir and VBM. Next slide. So yes, John Alvarado already mentioned, the number of units that we have as a goal. It's actually 525 air monitors and purifiers, although some families will be getting more air purifiers exactly for what John alluded to. There are families that do have children, a lot of children or seniors that live in the family that have either a respiratory problem, diagnosed or undiagnosed. And if there's a problem, we want to make sure that they get an additional, 2 or 3 units, whatever is needed, in order to make their home as healthy as we can provide. Thank you. Next one. So this is a photo of the air monitor, and as it describes, this is really about that PM 2.5, those little particles that we're after. Those are the ones that are really the culprit of a lot of our problems in our neighborhood. The carbon dioxide, of course, humidity, temperature, weather. This can be connected to, have an app, so you can be watching it wherever you want. It's mobile. So if you choose to connect your monitor to the local or the nearest air monitoring station, you'll be able to see a comparison as to what's going on in your home and what's going on outside. So it's pretty cool. I mean, I know a lot of people don't really know what we're breathing when we step into our homes. So this is a pretty neat gadget that a lot of our family members, our community residents, are now enjoying in their homes. Next one. So this is a photo of the Air Purifier, and as you can see, it's real beautiful design, Scandinavian design, and it's really compact, so it really helps families move them around from room to room and really be able to, as a monitor is indicating to them which room is polluted, they're able to take action and move it around and clean the air in their homes. Every 11 minutes, it's doing its purification. And the beauty of this is that it comes with the filters for the next 2 years. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful pieces of equipment that come with filters. So folks won't have to pay out of pocket for their filters until 2 years from now. So it's a wonderful program. Next slide. Here's a photo of Laura Benavidez, who is the Pear community organizer dedicated to this program to go to people's homes. In this case, when we're able to sit outside, we do that because of COVID. So here is a photo of her with National City resident showing her how to use a monitor. She brings with her a yellow folder, as you can see in the photo, that has all the manuals, everything's translated, information about local resources like the MAC project that can help people with their gas and electricity bill up to $3,000 per year. Information about the incentive that this program offers, $125 to help that can go towards, that potential increase from having them turned on. And information about how to keep your home healthy, how to reduce these housing hazards that contribute to either triggering asthma attacks or, exacerbating the asthma in general. So we do spend quite a bit of time going through all of this because, again, this is a really comprehensive program. It's not just to distribute the equipment, but explain all the health benefits, how to use it, how to maintain it, how to take care of it. And so it's pretty exciting. And the numbers so far, just about an hour ago, the numbers are changed. It's actually, we're at 77 air monitors have been distributed and a total of 30 air purifiers. So again, the goal is 525 and we're getting them out there. So next slide. And so what is it that we're hearing? We are hearing great things. I know this is tiny equipment, but they're very impactful. So let me tell you, the two things that we're hearing big time is I'm able to breathe better. I'm able to sleep better. And I know that for folks who are super healthy, full lung capacity, work out at any time of the day, morning, afternoon, sun, no sun, nighttime, you name it. Perhaps these statements will not trigger like a wow thing for you, but for our community that has, this, not the full lung capacity, who don't really need a monitor to tell them, when the air quality is really bad outside, they are really seeing this benefit. They're really expressing to us how thankful they are. You don't even know how many God bless yous we hear from the community. Wow. And so like, for instance, here, Rosa from Logan Heights resident, she's saying, I can sleep. And Angelica City is saying, my daughter has asthma. The monitor has been very helpful. Now we know when to open or close our windows. So, this actually tells you when the air is getting, moving from a green. So that's a cool thing. It's like color coded. So it's very community friendly. From clean air, if it's getting polluted, it goes into yellow, orange, and red. Folks are warned, open your windows or turn on your AC. Of course, a lot of our families don't have AC, but they're able to open up their windows. Another quote here is from Nancy. The kids have been benefiting from the air purifier. The two kids have had colds and the purifier has helped them with their breathing and reduced coughing. So again, this is important time when, we're in the fall and in the early spring, we have allergy seasons, we have regular colds, flus, and our folks are seeing a change, wow, they're like reduced coughs, we as parents, that is. And I want to mention the COVID situation. I've also heard that people are recovering a lot sooner from COVID with the purifier in their homes. If you do go to the EPA website, you go to the CDC website, they will tell you that air purifiers do make in respiratory and cardiovascular system. So that's proven. The company that we have picked for this, I should say that the APCD picked for this program, they have done a lot of around COVID, and they can't guarantee that you won't get it because that's impossible, but it does clean it once, if it's in the home, it's a 99.9 that it will eliminate the virus in the air. So again, it's another thing that at this point is coming really, really handy, very, very impactful. Next slide. So process, how do you sign up? So if you're interested, we have created a bilingual Pear hotline. It's 619-603-7758. It's a bilingual. You will have Laura Benavidez call you. What we need from you is just leave your name, telephone number. And Laura will check if you're within the boundary of the Portside communities. And then she'll call you back and we can then move by scheduling your first visit again, leaving you with the air monitor. 30 days later, we do a second visit where we then bring you the air purifier. Why is it that we have to do the 30-day after? Well, we want to establish a baseline. All of this information is being put into a dashboard, if you will. All of the tracking of the all the monitors that are going to be at one point, over 500. They will be giving us information that hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to do a download, and APCD will be able to look at, overall, what's it like, what is it that breathing, and look at spike apps, etc. So, but that's down the road. But anyway, that is why we wait for the 30 days to kind of establish a little baseline, if you will. And next slide. So sign up for your families, spread the news, call the hotline, email Laura Benavidez. We are offering a bag with non-toxic cleaning products for families who sign up, and also give us a referral of 5 friends, family, neighbors, so that, and it's the monitors. It's what else can families do to make their air cleaner? Well, one, using these toxic products that are, contaminating the air in people's homes, stop using those pesticides. So all of this is part of our conversation. We're offering this bag with a lot of goodies to get people to start using and making changes in their day-to-day lives. So far, it's been great. I know, again, they're small, tiny equipment, hard to believe, but we're already documenting wonderful outcomes. So thank you. Thank you to the county, if the county is here. Thank you to the Port of San Diego. Thank you to APCD for administrating this, for giving this to us, trusting in us to be able to get this out into our neighborhood. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Letty. If we can take just a couple of questions before we sign off today, feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you. To get us started, I'll hand it over to John Alvarado, followed by Nick. You're on mute, John.
Yes, my biggest concern is the fact that most of these units are not, they don't filter a whole lot of air. And so I would like to find out exactly how many cubic feet of air do they process, say, in an hour. So I'll definitely contact you. I have 2 very large air purification units in my place, and I showed you those filters, and there is still an immense amount of material coming into the home. It comes through, cracks in the walls or whatever the case might be. But my point is this, that whole house ventilation systems are actually the best. And of course, they're more money. But I really, truly believe that for so many of us, we need to go ahead and do the best we can for our children and for our seniors who have, worked so hard only to have this being faced with. The Environmental Health Coalition, and Letty, I want to let you know how wonderful and how proud I am that you're working so hard for our neighborhoods. It's awesome. But we got to do more, and we got to let the governor know we need help. We need real help. And that being said, I'll definitely get a hold of you, okay? And I would actually like to maybe find out where you got your system at so that I can independently buy some of this or whatever, so I can put it on my wall so that at least for right here in Logan, I'm able to get an idea of exactly what it is that we're getting, because it's a lot through our back door. It's huge. And like I showed you those filters, and that's with filters, system, air purification systems, like I said, running. Okay, so I'm on board with you 100%. And I pray that everyone that's heard your conversation and mine will contact us, because we are going to save la gente de este barrio. Punto. Ya se acabó. Thank you.
Moving along to Nick, and I think we'll close out the meeting after Nick's comments.
Yes, thank you, Chewy. And I know I'm short on time here, but I did just want to express my thanks and gratitude to EHC as well. They've been doing a fantastic job implementing this program, so all the credit goes out to them. They're doing the lion's share of getting out there, and this is a difficult program to frankly implement, because it's a very small community, and outreach and implementation makes that difficult. And they're the ones that are going out into the communities and church groups and the local school groups. They're just doing an incredible job. And so I just wanted to express my thanks to Letty and Laura and everybody else who's helping on this. There are more people that I know are working on this, but I just wanted to express my gratitude. And I hear you, John, Mr. Alvarado, on your points tonight for whole home air filtration. That's again certainly something we'll consider looking at in the future as part of future program iterations. We did have a limited amount of funding in this round, so which we've brought up, but we're continuing to look at future options, and we're going to continue looking at that. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up, and hopefully, I know either Letty or me we can reach out to you to give you the more information about the air monitor and the air purifier that we're using in this program. So happy to do that.
Awesome, because I have lots of members in the community who would love to be able to have one of these units, and they desperately need it.
Understood. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Letty, and everybody for staying over a couple of minutes late. I do want to be respectful of folks' time, so I think we'll close out today's meeting and thank everyone for their time and their efforts with our goal to really improve air quality in Portside. Our next meeting will be on June 28th, regular time at 5 p.m. Let us know if you have any questions, and I'll be sending over a highlights email in the next week or so with the information provided today. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Hi, thank you.
Buenas noches a todos.